The dress was the color of snow. Kate had spent 3 nights awake sewing every detail with fine thread borrowed from Lady Wren, the oldest seamstress in the village of Ashford. It was not a noble's dress, she knew that. It had no golden embroidery, no silk sleeves like the ones the lord's daughters wore. But it had something no purchased gown could ever carry. Every stitch had been made by her own hands, with care and with hope. Hope. Such a small word, yet it had carried an enormous weight through the past few months. Edrin had promised. 3 moons ago, on the night the rain fell so hard it flooded the village barn, he had held her face between his hands and said with all the clarity a wolf can offer, "At the convergence banquet, I will present you to my pack as my chosen companion, before everyone." Kate was 23 years old, the daughter of a blacksmith long dead, and she carried no known pack lineage. She was an Omega without a clan, without formal protection, without title. In Ashford, that meant she existed at the margins. Not a slave, not a noble, simply invisible. A woman who woke before dawn, carried water, helped tend wounds at the village healing post with herbs and poultices, and smiled at the wolves who passed without any of them truly seeing her. Until Edrin. Edrin Voss was the son of the Lord of the Voss Pack, one of the 5 packs that made up the Northern Territory. He was not the primary heir. That position belonged to his older brother. But he was of noble blood, a respected hunter, a wolf with green eyes and soft words. And he had chosen her, or so she had believed. The convergence banquet was held once every 2 years at Stonehall, the great fortress that rose from the heart of the Northern Territory like a fist of dark granite. It was where the 5 pack lords gathered alongside their families, their warriors, and their allies. Treaties were renewed, alliances were sealed, and, most significantly, companions were publicly declared before witnesses, a tradition older than any living wolf could remember. Kate had never set foot inside Stonehall before that night. She arrived with Marin, her closest friend since childhood, a beta woman with copper-red hair and sharp brown eyes, who had grown up in the same dirt road village, and never once let Kate forget that she deserved more than she allowed herself to believe. "You look like someone who belongs in there," Marin said as they approached the torchlit gates, adjusting the clasp of Kate's gray cloak. "I look like someone wearing a dress she made herself." "That's exactly what I said." Marin squeezed her hand. "Stop pulling at the hem. You'll unravel it." The great hall of Stonehall was everything Kate had imagined and more. Stone walls rose to vaulted ceilings hung with iron chandeliers burning with dozens of candles. The banners of the 5 packs, wolf heads in silver, gold, black, crimson, and deep blue, hung from the rafters like sleeping giants. Long tables of dark oak ran the length of the hall, already crowded with wolves in fine mantles and leather armor, goblets of dark wine catching the firelight. The scent of the room was overwhelming. Pine resin, tallow candles, roasted meat, aged wood, and beneath all of it, the layered musk of dozens of different packs mingling in one enclosed space. Kate kept her chin up. She had practiced that in the reflection of the water barrel outside her cottage. Chin up, shoulders back. Breathe slowly. She found Edrin near the eastern column, laughing with 2 men from his pack. When his eyes landed on her, something flickered across his face. Not the warmth she expected, but something closer to discomfort. She told herself she had imagined it. "Kate." He stepped toward her, lowering his voice. "You came. You invited me." She smiled carefully. "You said tonight was—" "I know what I said." He glanced sideways at the men behind him. "Walk with me for a moment." They moved to the edge of the hall, near a narrow corridor where the noise of the banquet became a low roar behind thick stone. Edrin did not look at her when he spoke. "My father has made arrangements," he said. "A formal alliance with the Crest Pack, sealed through a companionship declaration. Tonight." The silence that followed was so complete, Kate could hear the candle nearest to her hissing against a draft. "With whom?" she said. It was not a question. Her voice had gone very flat, and very quiet, the way still water goes quiet before it freezes. Her name is Celia Crest. She is the third daughter of Lord Crest. He finally looked at her, and his green eyes held something that might have been guilt if it had not been so carefully hidden beneath resignation. It was decided last week. I had no choice in the matter. You had no choice, Kate repeated. Pack obligations. You made me a promise, Edrin. Her voice did not shake. She was proud of that, and furious that she had to be. 3 moons ago, you held my face in your hands and you made me a promise. I know. He looked away again. I'm sorry. For a moment, Kate stood absolutely still. She thought about the 3 nights she had not slept. The borrowed thread. Lady Wren's arthritic hands guiding hers through the finer stitches, because Kate's fingers had trembled with excitement. She thought about Marin, who had braided her hair that evening with dried winter flowers tucked between the strands, saying, "This is your night, Kate. I know it is." She thought about hope, and how much room it had taken up inside her chest, and how strange it felt now that it was gone. Not like something stolen, but like a fire that had simply run out of wood. I see, she said at last. She turned and walked back into the hall. She did not run. She did not cry. She did not look for Marin immediately, because finding Marin would mean explaining, and explaining would mean speaking words out loud that she was not yet ready to give a voice to. Instead, she moved through the crowd with her chin still up and her hands folded in front of her, threading between wolves who did not notice her, which was, she supposed, nothing new. She was almost at the far end of the hall, near the passage that led to the outer courtyard, when she collided with something immovable. Not something. Someone. A man carrying a wooden tray of empty goblets. The tray tilted. 3 goblets clattered to the stone floor with a sound like small bells, and the man caught the 4th before it fell, his reflexes so fast they barely registered as movement. He was dressed simply, a dark servant's tunic, leather belt, no markings of rank or pack. His dark hair was pulled back in thick braids that fell past his shoulders. There was a faint scar along his jaw, barely visible in the torchlight. His eyes, when they lifted to hers, were a pale, startling blue that felt entirely out of place in a servant's face, eyes that observed rather than simply looked, that catalogued and considered, and gave nothing back in return. "Forgive me," Kate said immediately, bending to retrieve the fallen goblets before he could. She straightened and set them back on his tray, her movements efficient and unhurried. That was my fault. I wasn't watching where I was going. The man said nothing for a moment. He simply looked at her with those impossible blue eyes. "You picked up the goblets," he said finally. His voice was low and unhurried, carrying the particular weight of someone accustomed to silence. "You were holding the tray." She glanced at the cups she had placed back. It seemed like the sensible division of tasks. Something shifted in his expression. Too subtle to name, too deliberate to be accidental. "Are you well?" he asked. Kate blinked. In her experience, servants at grand banquets did not ask guests if they were well. Then again, she was not exactly a guest, and she suspected she looked precisely as hollow as she felt. "I'm perfectly fine," she said, and the steadiness in her own voice almost convinced her. "Thank you for asking." She stepped around him and continued toward the courtyard passage. She did not see the way he turned to watch her go. She did not see the way his pale blue eyes followed her through the crowd, with an attention that had nothing of casualness in it. Careful, intent, the way a wolf watches something it has only just recognized. She did not see either. The 2 men who materialized at his shoulders the moment she disappeared through the passage. Both large, both wearing the unmarked dark tunics of servants, both watching him with expressions that were quietly, unmistakably, waiting for orders. "Well," said the taller of the 2, a broad-shouldered wolf with a crooked nose and an almost permanent look of amusement. "She helped you pick up the cups." "She did," said the man with the braids. "No one has ever done that before." "No," he agreed. No one has. The second man, darker and quieter, said nothing at all. He simply watched the passage where Kate had disappeared, and then looked back at the man they stood beside, and his expression carried the particular weight of someone who has just witnessed something they will remember for a long time. The man with the braids set the tray down on a nearby table with complete calm, as though he had always intended to leave it there. "Find out her name," he said quietly. Neither of his companions asked why. The courtyard was cold. Kate stood near the stone well at its center, her arms wrapped around herself beneath her gray cloak, and let the night air do what the crowded hall had not allowed, fill her lungs completely. The sky above Stonehall was clear and enormous, thick with stars that had no interest in pack politics or broken promises, and she was grateful for their indifference. She heard Marin's footsteps before she saw her. After 20 years of friendship, she knew the particular rhythm of them. Quick and purposeful. The walk of someone who had already decided to fix whatever was wrong before she had all the facts. "I saw his face when you walked away," Marin said, appearing at her side with her copper hair slightly disheveled from pushing through the crowd. "What did he say?" "His father made an arrangement with the Crest Pack." Kate kept her voice even. "He is declaring a companion tonight. Someone named Celia Crest." Marin was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. "I'll go back inside and pour his wine directly onto his boots." "You will not." "Kate." "It's done, Marin." She turned to look at her friend, and something in her expression must have communicated the fragility beneath the calm, because Marin stopped arguing immediately and simply put an arm around her shoulders. "I'm not going to fall apart in a courtyard. I refuse." "You're allowed to fall apart. Not here." She exhaled slowly. "Not in front of his pack, his father's allies, and everyone who already thinks I have no business being inside those walls." Marin held her tighter and said nothing, which was the correct response, and one of the many reasons Kate had kept her close for 2 decades. They stood like that for a while, the sounds of the banquet drifting through the stone archways in muffled waves, laughter, the scrape of benches, the low percussion of a drum beginning somewhere in the hall. The convergence ceremonies would start soon. The declarations would be made. She should leave before they began, she knew. Staying would only mean witnessing Edrin stand before the assembled packs and give to someone else the words he had promised her. She was about to say exactly that to Marin when the courtyard gate opened. 3 men entered. They were dressed as servants, plain dark tunics, no pack markings. But something about the way they moved made every instinct Kate possessed go very still and very alert. Not because they seemed threatening, because they moved the way water moves around stone, naturally and without effort, as though the space around them simply rearranged itself out of courtesy. The one in the center was the man from the hall, the one with the braids and the pale blue eyes and the voice like a room with no echo. He was carrying nothing this time. No tray, no goblets. His hands were at his sides, and his gaze had already found her across the courtyard before she had fully registered his presence, which was the sort of thing that should have been unsettling, and instead was simply, inexplicably, steady. "The Omega from the hall," said the broader man beside him, the one with the crooked nose and the expression of permanent, mild entertainment. He said it not unkindly, and not to Kate, but to no one in particular, the way someone narrates events to themselves when they find them interesting. "My name is Kate," she said clearly, because she had spent enough of her life being referred to by category rather than name. The broad man blinked, then smiled, genuinely, with something that looked like approval. "Roan," he said, pressing a hand to his chest. "And this is Davin." He gestured to the darker, quieter man, who inclined his head without altering his expression in any measurable way. Kate looked at the third man. He had not offered his name. "And you?" she asked. "Calder," he said. A simple name, plainly delivered. It occurred to her distantly that none of these names matched any servant roster she had ever heard associated with Stonehall, but she had other things occupying her attention. "You followed me," she said. It was not an accusation. It was an observation, delivered with the same directness she had used on the goblets. "We came for air," Roan offered pleasantly. "Through the service gate, at the same moment I came outside. Coincidences are underappreciated." Calder said nothing, but something in the line of his mouth suggested that Roan's performance amused him in a way he had no intention of acknowledging aloud. Maren had gone slightly rigid beside Kate, her beta instincts clearly registering something that Kate's omega senses were registering differently. Not danger, exactly, but significance. The way the air changes before a storm, not to threaten, but to announce. "You asked if I was well," Kate said, addressing Calder directly. "Inside the hall. I did." Servants at convergence banquets don't generally ask guests that question. Perhaps they should. He studied her with those unsettling pale eyes, and there was nothing predatory in it. It was more like the attention of someone reading something they find genuinely worth reading. You walked away from something painful. It seemed worth acknowledging. Kate felt Maren go very still beside her. "You don't know what I walked away from," Kate said carefully. "No," he agreed. "But I know what someone who has just held themselves together through something difficult looks like. You have been doing it since you stepped outside." A brief pause. "You're still doing it." The accuracy of that was sharp enough that Kate had to take a slow breath before responding. "That's a great deal of observation for a man carrying empty goblets," she said. Roan made a sound that was very nearly a laugh, quickly suppressed. "I observe things," Calder said simply. "It's a habit." "What did you observe about me, specifically?" She did not know why she asked it. Perhaps because she was tired, and tired people ask honest questions when careful people would stay quiet. He considered her for a moment, with an unhurried thoroughness that should have felt intrusive, and somehow did not. "That you picked up goblets you did not knock over," he said. "That you apologized for a collision that was equally both our faults, but meant it genuinely rather than reflexively. That when you walked away from whoever hurt you tonight, you chose the direction that led away from the crowd rather than toward anyone who might comfort you, because you would rather feel the pain privately than perform recovery publicly." He paused. "And that you are angry, but you are wearing it quietly because you've had a great deal of practice." The courtyard was very silent. Maren was staring at Calder with an expression Kate recognized. The look of someone who has just been shown a thing they cannot decide whether to admire or distrust. Kate herself felt something strange move through her chest. Not warmth, exactly. Not yet. More like the sensation of being seen after a long time of being looked through, which was an entirely different thing and considerably more disorienting. "You're not a servant," she said. She did not say it with alarm. She said it the way she said most things. Plainly, because plain words were more honest than careful ones. Something moved behind his eyes. "What makes you say that?" he asked, and there was genuine curiosity in the question, not deflection. "Servants learn not to see too much. It's safer." She held his gaze steadily. "You see everything and you're not afraid of any of it. That's not a habit you learn carrying goblets." Roan turned away from them both at this point and appeared to become deeply interested in the far courtyard wall, his broad shoulders shaking with something he was clearly working hard to contain. Davin beside him looked at Calder with an expression that communicated, without a single word, "I told you so." Calder looked at Kate for a long moment. "You're perceptive," he said at last. "I'm poor," she said simply. "People who are poor learn to read rooms. It's how we avoid mistakes we can't afford." "And what room are you reading right now?" She tilted her head slightly, the long braid over her shoulder catching the moonlight. "One where something important is happening," she said, "and I don't yet have enough information to know what it is." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said in the same low, unhurried voice, "If you're willing, I'd like to talk with you. Not as a servant. Not as whatever you think I might be. Simply as two people in a cold courtyard who have found something worth a conversation." Maren made the smallest sound beside her. Not a warning, but an involuntary signal of interest. Kate looked at this man who called himself Calder, and who carried himself like something ancient and certain. And she thought about empty halls and borrowed thread and broken promises, and she thought about how little she had to lose. "I'm not going back inside tonight," she said. "Neither am I," he replied. Roan turned back around, the picture of innocence. "How lovely. Neither are we." Davin said nothing, but for the first time since entering the courtyard, the corner of his mouth moved, barely, briefly, in something that was almost a smile. They talked until the torches in the courtyard burned low. It was not the kind of conversation Kate had expected. There was no performance in it, no careful maneuvering of words toward some hidden agenda she could detect. Calder asked questions the way someone turns pages in a book they genuinely want to read. Unhurried, attentive, returning to earlier passages when something new gave them different meaning. He asked about the healing post in Ashford, about the herbs she used and why she chose them, about whether she had learned from someone or taught herself. Kate answered honestly, because dishonesty required energy she did not have that night, and because something about the quality of his attention made evasion feel like a waste of both their time. She told him about her father, the blacksmith, who had died of a lung sickness when she was 14, and left her nothing but his iron tools and the knowledge that hard work was its own kind of dignity. She told him about Lady Wren and the borrowed thread, and when she said it, she did not intend for it to sound like anything important. But she saw something shift in his expression that told her he understood exactly what it meant. "You made the dress yourself," he said. It was not a question. "Every stitch." She looked down at the pale fabric briefly, then back up. "It seemed important at the time." "It still is," he said quietly. "The fact that it was made with care doesn't change because the occasion changed." Kate was quiet for a moment. "You're surprisingly decent for a man who won't tell me what he actually does," she said. Roan, seated on the edge of the stone well with his long legs stretched out before him, made a sound of profound entertainment. "She keeps doing that," he said to no one. "I find it extraordinary." "What does she keep doing?" Maren asked. She had relaxed considerably over the past hour, drawn into the strange gravity of the conversation, the way a current draws a boat. Not forcefully, but with the patient insistence of moving water. "Saying the true thing," Roan said, as though this were remarkable. "Most people spend enormous effort avoiding it." "Kate has never seen the point of that," Maren said, and there was unmistakable pride in it. Davin, leaning against the courtyard wall with his arms crossed, said nothing, but his dark eyes moved between Kate and Calder with the focused patience of someone watching a game whose outcome they already know, but are nonetheless invested in witnessing. "May I ask you something?" Kate said, turning back to Calder. "Yes." "Why are you out here? Truly." She held his gaze without apology. Not the courtyard air answer, the real one. He looked at her for a moment with those pale blue eyes that gave so little away and held so much. "I came to the convergence to observe," he said carefully. "Not the alliances or the declarations, the people, how they treat those they believe have nothing to offer them." Something about the phrasing made Kate's attention sharpen. "That's an unusual thing for a servant to evaluate," she said. "It's an important thing for anyone to evaluate," he replied. "And what have you observed?" "Tonight?" He was quiet for a moment. "That the wolves inside that hall who carry the most impressive titles treated the serving staff as furniture. That the man who hurt you tonight did so not from cruelty, but from cowardice, which is in some ways worse. And that the woman he chose to let go picked up goblets that weren't hers to pick up and apologized for a collision that wasn't her fault, and still managed to be the most honest person I've spoken to in longer than I care to remember." The courtyard was very still. Maren had stopped pretending not to listen with her entire body. Kate felt something move through her that was not quite warmth and not quite grief. Some compound emotion for which she did not have a precise name, sitting directly in the center of her chest. "You don't know me," she said softly. No, he agreed. But I'd like to. Before she could respond, the doors to the great hall burst open, and the sound of the banquet flooded the courtyard, a roar of voices, and beneath it the particular cadence of a formal announcement. The convergence ceremonies had begun. And then a second sound cut through the first. A voice Kate recognized. Edrin's voice, amplified by the stone hall, carrying clearly through the open doors. I, Edrin Voss, son of Lord Voss of the Northern Pack, declare before all assembled. Kate turned away from the doors. She did not need to hear the rest, but the night had other plans. A figure appeared in the courtyard archway, not from the hall, but from the outer gate. A young wolf in Voss pack colors, breathing hard, his eyes scanning the courtyard until they landed on Calder. He stopped, blinked, looked at Calder with an expression that was equal parts confusion and alarm. Then he looked at the plain servant's tunic, then back at the face above it, and he went very pale. My, he began. Not now, Fen, Calder said. His voice had not changed in tone or volume, but something in it was different, a quality that had always been present, but had perhaps been slightly muffled, now entirely unguarded. Whatever it is, it will wait. Fen closed his mouth, looked at Kate, then at Maren, then back at Calder. It's about Lord Voss, he said carefully. He's been asking for you. He doesn't know where. He stopped himself again and swallowed. He wouldn't ask if it weren't necessary. Calder was quiet for a moment. Then he straightened slightly. And it was that movement, more than anything else that evening, that made something click into place for Kate. Because it was not the movement of a servant remembering their duties. It was the movement of someone setting aside one version of themselves and resuming another. He turned to Kate. I need to go inside, he said. Of course, she said. Her voice was steady, but her mind was moving very quickly now. He held her gaze for a moment. Will you be here when I return? That depends on how long you're gone. Something crossed his face. Not quite a smile, but related to one. He reached into the leather satchel at his belt and removed something small, setting it on the edge of the stone well between them. It was a carved wooden token, the kind that served as a personal seal, pressed in wax on formal documents. Simple, unadorned, but the symbol carved into it was one that Kate did not recognize, which meant it belonged to no pack she had encountered. So you know I intend to come back, he said. Then he walked through the archway with Fen at his heels, and Roan pushed himself off the edge of the well, stretched enormously, and looked at Kate with an expression of extraordinary satisfaction. I don't suppose, Maren said slowly, that you're going to tell us who he actually is. I am not, Roan agreed pleasantly. But I will tell you this. He picked up his own cloak from where he had draped it over the well and swung it over his shoulders. In 7 years, I have never once seen him stay in a courtyard for 3 hours talking to anyone. Lords, ambassadors, pack elders, council members, no one. He looked at Kate with something that was entirely genuine beneath the lightness. You might want to think about what that means. He walked inside. Davin lingered a moment. He looked at Kate with his dark, patient eyes. He wasn't testing you, he said quietly. It was the most he had spoken all evening. In case you were wondering, whatever this was tonight, it wasn't a test. Then he too was gone. Kate and Maren stood alone in the courtyard with the sounds of the convergence ceremony filtering through the stone behind them, and the night air cold and clear above, and a small carved token sitting on the edge of the well between them. Maren picked it up, turned it over, looked at the symbol on its face with narrowed eyes. Kate, she said slowly. I know. That symbol. I know, Maren. That's not a pack seal, I know. Kate took the token gently from her friend's hand and closed her fingers around it. The wood was warm. I know. She stood very still for a long moment, her heart doing something entirely new, and looked at the archway through which a man named Calder, A man dressed in a servant's plain tunic with braided dark hair and impossible blue eyes and a voice like the quietest room in the world, had just walked. The symbol carved into the token was a wolf's head inside a crown. There was only one seal in the entire Northern Territory that carried that mark. The Alpha King. Kate did not sleep that night. Marin had found them a small room in the outer wing of Stonehall, one of the modest chambers reserved for non-noble attendees of the Convergence, with a narrow bed, a single candle, and a window that looked out over the dark forest surrounding the fortress. Kate sat on the edge of the bed with the carved token in her palm and did not lie down once. The wolf's head inside a crown. She had seen that seal before, though never this close. It appeared on the official decrees that reached even small villages like Ashford. Documents that arrived rolled in black ribbon and pressed with dark wax, carrying edicts about territorial boundaries, trade agreements, and pack law. Documents that everyone handled with a particular kind of careful reverence because they came from the highest authority in the Northern Territory, King Cassian Drave, the Alpha King. He had no living family. He had ascended to the throne 11 years ago at the age of 26, following the death of his father in a border conflict with the Eastern Pax. He ruled from the Drave Citadel, 3 days' ride north of Stonehall. He was known for two things equally: absolute fairness in territorial judgments, and an almost complete absence of personal information. No one knew much about him beyond what he chose to make public, which was very little. There were rumors that he had refused 3 formal alliance marriages, that he attended convergence gatherings incognito, which most people assumed was exaggeration. Apparently, it was not. Kate turned the token over in her fingers and thought about pale blue eyes and a voice like a quiet room, and a man who had asked her if she was well in the middle of a banquet hall with no reason to ask and every reason not to bother. She thought about I observe things, how they treat those they believe have nothing to offer them. She thought about herself, kneeling to pick up goblets on a stone floor, apologizing for a collision that was equally both their fault, not because she was trained to be small, but because it had simply been the honest and decent thing to do. And she thought, with a clarity that was almost uncomfortable, that he had been watching for exactly that. She did not know how to feel about that. By the time pale gray light began to show at the window, she had settled into something that was not quite peace, but was at least honest. She was not angry. She was uncertain, and uncertain was something she knew how to carry. She was braiding her hair in the thin morning light when the knock came at the door. Not Marin. Marin knocked the way she did everything, with decisive energy. This knock was quieter, deliberate, 3 even sounds, the kind produced by someone who is accustomed to doors opening for them and has learned to knock anyway. Kate crossed the room and opened the door. Cassian stood in the corridor. He was not dressed as a servant anymore. The tunic was gone, replaced by a fitted leather surcoat in deep charcoal, cross-laced with dark straps, a heavy cloak the color of midnight thrown over his shoulders, and fastened at the collar with a silver clasp bearing the wolf and crown seal. His braided hair was pulled back with a leather cord. He looked entirely like what he was, which was, Kate reflected, exactly how he had looked the night before, except that now the context had caught up with the truth. He looked at her for a moment. "You know," he said. It was not a question. "The token." She stepped back from the doorway. "Come in, if you'd like." He entered the small room with the particular quality of stillness that very large presences bring to small spaces, not crowding it exactly, but making it aware of itself. He looked at the narrow bed, the guttered candle, the gray cloak she had hung on the peg by the door. "You didn't leave," he said. "I said it depended on how long you were gone." Kate sat back on the edge of the bed and looked at him directly. "You were gone all night. I decided to interpret that as extenuating circumstances." Something moved through his expression that was warm and careful at once. "Lord Voss," he said, "had concerns about the alliance declaration his son made last night. He wanted a private arbitration before the morning session. And how is that Lord Voss's son's choices became a matter for the Alpha King's private arbitration? Kate asked. Her voice was even. She already suspected the answer, but she wanted to hear him say it. Cassian was quiet for a moment. Because his son had made a prior commitment, he said, to an Omega woman, witnessed by 3 people. In pack law, a witnessed verbal commitment made in good faith carries weight, not equal to a formal declaration, but not nothing. He paused. Lord Voss was informed of this last night and asked to address it formally this morning before the Convergence Council. Kate stared at him. You did that, she said. Pack law did that. I merely ensured it was applied. Cassian. She said his name plainly, the same way she had said everything else, and watched something flicker in his expression at hearing it from her without title or ceremony. You intervened on behalf of a woman you met for 20 minutes in a banquet hall. 40 minutes, he said, counting the courtyard. That is not the point. No. He met her gaze steadily. The point is that what was done to you was a violation of witnessed word, and that matters regardless of the status of the person it was done to. Pack law does not have a clause that makes broken promises acceptable when the person wronged has no title. Kate was quiet for a long moment. Outside the window, Stonehall was beginning to wake. She could hear the sounds of the fortress stirring, boots on stone corridors, the distant clang of the kitchens, voices carrying through the walls. What happens now? She asked. With Voss. He will make a formal acknowledgement before the council this morning that his son's prior commitment was improperly set aside. It will be entered into the Convergence record. He paused. It doesn't restore what was lost, but it means the official record of these proceedings does not pretend it didn't happen. And Edrin? Edrin's declaration stands. He chose the Crest Alliance. Something in Cassian's voice was entirely neutral on this point. Not dismissive, simply factual, the way he might read a passage from a law text. But his conduct is documented. That follows him. Kate nodded slowly. She looked down at the token still in her hand, then held it out to him. He took it, his fingers briefly overlapping hers in the exchange, and the contact was brief and warm and entirely unremarkable, except that neither of them moved away from it immediately. Why the disguise? She asked. Truly, last night. He was quiet for a moment, turning the token over in his hand the same way she had. Because I have attended 4 convergences as king, he said. And in 4 convergences I have watched the same thing happen. People perform for power. They show me what they want authority to see. The wolves who are genuinely decent, genuinely fair, genuinely worth trusting, they're nearly impossible to find in a room full of people who know who you are, because everyone adjusts. He paused. When no one knows who you are, you see what people actually are. And what did you see last night? Kate asked. He looked at her. The morning light from the narrow window fell across his face and made his pale eyes very clear. Someone who picked up goblets she didn't knock over, he said. Someone who apologized honestly instead of reflexively. Someone who walked away from humiliation with more dignity than the person who caused it. He paused. Someone who, when she suspected I wasn't who I said I was, didn't become frightened or calculating. She just said it plainly and kept talking to me the same way she had before. Kate held his gaze. I treated you like a person, she said. That shouldn't be remarkable. No, he agreed quietly. It shouldn't. The silence between them was the comfortable kind, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. I'd like to see you again, Cassian said, after the convergence. Not as a test, not as an observation, as a choice. He held her gaze with complete steadiness. But that is entirely yours to make. Kate looked at this man, this king dressed in dark leather and a wolf and crown clasp, who had spent an evening carrying empty goblets to watch how people behaved when they believed no one important was watching, and who had apparently found something worth returning to. She thought about Edrin, and the borrowed thread, and the dress the color of snow. She thought about how strange it was that the worst night of her life had also contained this. I'll be in Ashford, she said, when the convergence ends. Something in his expression settled, not triumph, nothing so sharp as that, something quieter, like relief. "Then I'll know where to find you," he said. 6 weeks passed. Kate returned to Ashford and resumed her life with the particular discipline of someone who has learned not to build expectations on uncertain ground. She tended the healing post. She gathered winter herbs from the frozen ridge above the village. She repaired the hem of the snow-colored dress, which had caught on a stone step during the journey home, and hung it carefully on the peg beside her door, rather than folding it away in the chest, where she kept things she no longer needed. Maureen watched all of this with the focused attention of someone determined not to say the thing they were thinking. She lasted 11 days. "You kept the dress visible," she said one morning, appearing in Kate's doorway with 2 cups of hot broth and the expression of someone who considered themselves extraordinarily patient. "The hook was empty," Kate said, without looking up from the poultice she was preparing. "There are 3 other empty hooks. This one gets the best light." Maureen sat down across from her and said nothing for a moment, which was always more effective than saying something. "I don't know if he'll come," Kate said finally, her hands still working. "He is a king, Marin. He rules a territory. He has councils and borders and alliance negotiations and matters of actual consequence occupying every hour of his existence. One evening in a courtyard with an Omega from Ashford is not, Kate, necessarily something that translates into Kate." She looked up. Marin was looking past her, through the small window that faced the village road. Kate turned. There were 3 riders at the edge of Ashford. They had dismounted and were standing with their horses at the village well, and one of the villagers was pointing toward the healing post, Kate realized, with a lurch of understanding. And the man who stood slightly ahead of the other 2 had dark braided hair and a cloak the color of midnight, and was looking in the direction the villager was pointing, with the unhurried certainty of someone who had known all along where they were going. Kate set down the poultice. She did not run, but she walked with a speed that Marin would later describe, with great affection, as very nearly running. She opened the door of the healing post and stepped outside into the cold morning air, and Cassian looked up from across the village road and saw her, and stopped walking. They regarded each other across the distance for a moment. She in her plain work dress with herb-stained fingers and her braid coming loose. He in dark leather and a king's cloak with frost on his shoulders from the ride. Then he crossed the distance between them and stopped 2 paces away, close enough that she could see the pale clarity of his eyes in the winter light. "You came," she said. "I said I would." "You didn't say when." "No," he agreed. "I should have." The council session ran longer than anticipated. There were border matters and then a territorial dispute that required 3 days of arbitration. And then my advisor, Rowan, spent an entire afternoon arguing that I was handling the timing incorrectly. Which, Rowan was here? He rode ahead yesterday to ensure I wasn't about to make an error of judgment. Something moved through Cassian's expression that was both fond and long-suffering. He has opinions about how kings should conduct personal matters. And Davin? Behind me. He doesn't trust Rowan's assessment of anything without verifying it himself. He paused. They mean well. Kate felt something loosen in her chest, the last tightly held remnant of the uncertainty she had been carrying for 6 weeks, releasing all at once like a knot finally given enough slack. "Come inside," she said. "You look like you've been riding since before dawn." "Since before dawn yesterday," he said. And then, because she was looking at him with an expression that asked the question without words, he added quietly, "I didn't want to wait any longer." She held the door open for him. He ducked through it. The doorway was built for ordinary people, not for men of his height, and straightened inside the small, warm space of the healing post, with its bundles of dried herbs hanging from the rafters, and its rows of clay jars, and its wooden work table worn smooth by years of use. He looked around at all of it, with the same quality of attention he gave everything, careful and genuine. "This is where you work," he said, "every day." He looked at a bundle of silver leaf hanging near the window. This is for fever reduction. You use it in a compress, not a tea. Most healers don't know that. Kate turned to look at him. Most kings don't know that either. My mother was a healer, he said simply. Before she was a queen. She taught me that the compress reaches the blood faster than the stomach in high fevers. He paused, touching the dried bundle lightly. She said it was the most important thing she knew. Kate was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. She sounds like someone worth knowing, she said. She was. He turned from the window to look at her. She died 4 years after my father. The healers said it was her heart, but I think she simply found the world less interesting without him in it. The honesty of it, the clean, unguarded quality of it, settled into the room like warmth from a fire. I'm sorry, Kate said. She meant it fully. I know you do, he said. That's evident in everything you do. They sat across from each other at the work table for a long time that morning, talking the way they had in the courtyard, without performance, without strategy, following the conversation wherever it went. He told her about the territorial dispute and the council members who treated fairness as a bargaining position rather than a principle. She told him about the fever that had moved through Ashford's youngest children 2 weeks ago, and the 3 nights she had spent moving between households with silverleaf compresses and cooling broths until every last one of them was breathing clearly. He listened to all of it with complete attention. At some point, Marin appeared in the doorway, assessed the situation with one sweeping look, announced that she was going to visit Lady Wren and would not be back until late afternoon, and disappeared with the efficiency of someone executing a plan they had prepared in advance. It was late morning when Cassian said, I want to ask you something. Ask, Kate said. He looked at her steadily. I want you to come to the Citadel. Not as a guest, not as a visitor, as someone I am formally, publicly, asking to build something with. He paused. I am aware that this is not a small thing to ask. You have a life here, a home, a purpose. I am not asking you to abandon those. I am asking if you are willing to bring them with you, and if you are willing to see if what began in a cold courtyard with empty goblets can become something that holds weight in daylight and ordinary hours. Kate looked at him for a long moment. She thought about everything the night of the convergence had taken from her. The borrowed thread, the broken promise, the hollow walk to the courtyard door. And she thought about everything that same night had given her, which she had not expected, and could not have planned, and which had turned out to be, improbably, considerably more valuable than what she had lost. I have conditions, she said. Something in his expression warmed. Tell me, the healing post in Ashford needs a trained replacement before I leave. I won't go until someone is here who can do what I do. She met his gaze directly. The people here depend on this work. That doesn't stop mattering because my circumstances change. Agreed, he said immediately. I'll send 2 trained healers from the Citadel within the fortnight. Marin comes with me. Of course. And I will not be decorative, she said. I don't know how to be decorative, and I have no interest in learning. If I come to the Citadel, I work. I contribute. I am not a companion piece. He looked at her with those pale, clear eyes, and the expression on his face was the one she had first seen in the banquet hall. That particular, intent quality of someone reading something they find genuinely worth reading. Kate, he said quietly. I dressed as a servant for an evening to find someone who treated the world with honesty, when they believed no one of consequence was watching. He paused. The last thing I want is for you to become something different now that you know who I am. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded once. Then we have an agreement, she said. He reached across the work table and extended his hand. Not a king's gesture, not a formal seal, simply a man offering his hand to a woman across a table. And Kate placed her hand in his, and they shook on it with the solemnity of 2 people who understood that they were agreeing to something real. His hand was warm. He held hers a moment longer than a handshake required, And she let him. Spring came early to Ashford that year. True to his word, Cassian sent 2 healers from the Citadel within a fortnight, a woman named Petra, with 20 years of experience, and a quiet young man named Elio, who had memorized every herb compendium ever written and was eager to prove it. Kate spent 3 weeks teaching them the particular rhythms of Ashford, the families who needed checking on, the ridge where the best silver leaf grew, the child in the miller's household who was afraid of poultices but would accept a compress if you let him hold the cloth himself. She handed Petra the key to the healing post on a Tuesday morning in early spring, and Petra received it with the seriousness it deserved. Edrin Voss, she heard through Marin's considerable network of information, had been formally recorded in the convergence documents as having broken a witnessed verbal commitment. The Crest Alliance had proceeded, and his new companion was said to be perfectly pleasant. Whether Edrin himself was happy was not something Kate spent time wondering about. She wished him no harm. She simply found that she thought about him less and less as the weeks passed, the way one stops noticing a scar once it has finished healing. Kate rode to the Citadel on the first warm day of spring, with Marin beside her, and Roan ahead of them providing cheerful and largely unnecessary navigation commentary, and Davin behind them silent as a shadow and twice as reliable. Cassian met them at the Citadel gate. He was not dressed as a servant. He was fully himself, dark leather, wolf and crown clasp, the cloak of midnight blue, his braided hair caught back with the cord she had come to recognize. He stood at the top of the gate steps with Roan and Davin flanking him, and when Kate rode through the gate and dismounted and looked up at him, he walked down the steps to meet her, rather than waiting for her to come to him. "Welcome," he said when he reached her. "Thank you," she said, "for coming down. I wasn't going to make you climb steps after 3 days on horseback." Marin, dismounting behind her, said quietly to Roan, "I like him." "Everyone does, eventually," Roan said pleasantly. "It takes some people longer than others." The Citadel was large and old, and full of cold corridors that would take months to learn, and the council members looked at Kate with expressions ranging from curiosity to careful reservation, and there were 1,000 adjustments ahead of them, and no clear map for any of it. But that evening, Cassian showed her the Citadel's healing rooms, 3 large chambers with south-facing windows and shelves already stocked with herb stores and clean linen, and said that they were hers to run as she saw fit, answering to no one but herself and whatever her patients needed. She stood in the center of those rooms for a long time. Then she rolled up her sleeves, the way she did every morning in Ashford, and began to take inventory. Cassian watched from the doorway for a moment. Then he smiled, quietly, completely, and left her to her work. 6 months later, before the assembled pack lords of all 5 territories at a formal convergence held at the Drave Citadel, King Cassian declared Kate his chosen companion. She wore a new dress for the occasion, white, like the first one, but made with thread that was entirely her own. Marin had helped with the sleeves, and Petra had sent dried winter flowers from Ashford to tuck into her braid. She stood before the council and the pack lords and the banners of 5 territories with her chin up and her shoulders back, and when Cassian took her hand before all of them, she held his without hesitation. In the record of that convergence, entered in the official documents and sealed with the wolf and crown mark, her name appeared not as Omega of no lineage, but simply as Kate, healer, companion to the king, and woman who had walked out of a cold courtyard one night, carrying nothing but her own honesty, and found that it had been, all along, exactly enough. Edrin Voss was present at that convergence. He stood near the eastern column with his companion at his side and watched the declaration with an expression that those nearby would later describe. In lowered voices, as a man realizing the precise size of what he had set aside, he said nothing. There was nothing to say. The convergence ended. The pack lords rode home. The Citadel settled into its ordinary rhythms, and Kate learned the names of every person in it, healer, guard, advisor, and cook alike, because that was simply who she was, and who she intended to remain. And on winter evenings, when the fire burned low in the great library and the wind came down from the northern ridge, Cassian would find her there among her herb compendiums and her patient records, and sit across from her the way he had sat across the work table in Ashford. And they would talk the way they always had, without performance, without strategy, without either of them being anyone other than exactly themselves. It was, Kate thought on one such evening, looking up at him over the rim of her cup, a very fine way to live. Cassian looked back at her and agreed.